So once you did that, you clearly need to ask yourself, where should I start? And remember, we thought about that in that circle. You need to scope out the project, set a schedule for onboarding organizations and applications. So what are some of the ways you can define how you want to onboard an organization or application? What are some of the criteria? A lot of people start with high-risk areas and applications, right? So a lot of times, you can have applications that contain sensitive data, financial information, HR information, credit card information, things that expose your company to huge liability if the data is lost from there, right? You can start with those applications. If you are forced by a regulatory requirement like SOX or Euro SOX or something like this, or in your industry regulations to take care of an application, and you have had audit finding, that's clearly a good use case to get started there. And you can start with organizations that just purely have a lot of access, right? You can look at an organization like a financial accounting organization and start from there. In fact, our case study company did exactly just that. Or the other way, you can start with the easy pieces, right? So some of the easy areas that people look at are task-oriented areas of the company. So places like call centers, places like warehouses, where you have people kind of doing the exact same kind of thing over and over again, which is very mechanical, very repetitive, very task-oriented. And you can really quickly capture what people need to have access to there. So again, call centers, branch operations for retail banking or retail are ideal places, warehouses, manufacturing floor workers, and I'm sure you can come up with your own organizations and pieces of organization there. Rules of thumb. Rules of thumb, means that these are some of the guidelines that are, pretty much apply to every company that I've worked with. So these are some of the questions that, okay, we designed our roles, we designed our access recertification process, we understood what we need to do here. We came up with these numbers. So maybe we have, 100 roles for a company of 10,000 workers, or we define 3,000 roles for 3,000 users. Is that right? The first thing is really expect iterations. You're not, as I said, it's an iterative process. It's not a linear A to B kind of process. So you're going to come back and revisit certain decisions. There's going to be not only mishaps or basically difficulties in how you implement the process, but there's always going to be changes to business requirements. So it's just natural. Very important. The number of roles that you define should be essentially 10% or less of the number of employees in the organization. Okay, so that means that if you have 10,000 people working in a company or 10,000 users, the ideal number of roles should be at 1,000 or less. I would say ideally it's about 6 to 7%, so 600 to 700 roles for 10,000 people. I worked with companies where they had 10,000 users and 3 billion roles. Okay, not million, 3 billion roles. I don't know how to. I worked with companies that had 15,000 users, and they had 15,000 change events impacting users every month. I don't know how you do this. And they told me that we're spending way too much money on doing all this manually. If you don't have 10 to 15 people in a role, it's not a role, it's an exception. So it's basically, if you create a job role for every single person, that's basically something that leads to the 3 billion roles for 10,000 people kind of environment. If you remember I showed you that diagram where the roles were assigned manually by the hiring manager or the application owner to a person, and if you don't use a feed-based mechanism, if you don't use rules, you basically are going to have to do something like this, manage access request manually. The rule of thumb is to give really 6 or fewer roles to managers for approval. So if they need to put people manually in the role, the menu they should be choosing from should have 6 or fewer roles. If you give them 25 roles, they have no idea how to do this. And finally, you probably have to cover up to 70% of your employees. If you cover much less than 70% of your employees, that means you're not doing job roles, right? That's not role-based access control, not automation. If you do more than 70%, then every exception is a role, and you're basically past the point of diminishing returns. So you're just spending your time on trying to implement this for everyone. You have to face the fact that there are some organizations like IT administration or maybe some HR areas where you just cannot implement job roles. So start with the easy areas, the risky areas, and don't worry about all the areas in the company. And finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about our case